Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, partners, and friends who are here today for this event. And a very special word of welcome to all the young changemakers who are here with us today. And we hope we'll hear from you in the course of this meeting as well, particularly the Q&A session. My name is Cherian Thomas, and I'm the regional leader of World Vision International for the South Asia Pacific region. World Vision is honored to host this side event on the sidelines of the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, together with ICVA, which is the International Council of Voluntary Agencies, on a rather ambitious topic: unlock localization in Asia and the Pacific, strategies, challenges, and promising practices. And we really hope that we would have a very honest and timely discussion on the localization agenda. Why are we having this event? Localization is increasingly becoming a critical topic of conversation in the humanitarian sector. We cannot, as we saw in the video earlier, build a sustainable future fit for children without local actors leading the change. We firmly believe that localization is critical in the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. And adapting SDGs into the local contexts and local realities require a very deep understanding of the localization agenda. To achieve this goal, what we need is a very diverse array of local actors who must be engaged as critical stakeholders. And this would include local governments, local and international NGOs, CSOs, women-led organizations, children and youth groups, faith-based organizations, and so on. World Vision is committed to this agenda. We've just, in fact, in the region, completed a study on what localization means for us and what is the way ahead. We have historically been, in some sense, far ahead in this journey, in the process of strengthening local capacities and leaderships. Several decades ago, the whole process of internationalization, as we called it, shifted our center of gravity to a global center outside the main office, which raised the bulk of its funding. Governance leadership in the World Vision International Board has a large representation of field office countries. Local boards and local leadership in several countries run the work that we do. Sometimes we say that we are our own best kept secret. World Vision itself has signed up to the Grand Bargain, to its commitments relating to strengthening local and national actors. We are also committed to the core humanitarian standards, which integrate localization principles with these standards. While we yet do not have a clear World Vision definition, for us, it means putting local actors at the forefront of development and humanitarian programming, recognizing the fact that local actors have already been working there before external interventions are introduced, and that many of them will remain long after the INGOs and the international players leave. And this really means for us increased funding, capacity development, creating equitable and meaningful partnerships with the right kind of power balance, which will mobilize local networks and offer greater access to the affected populations so that the humanitarian response would be adequately sustained. And I'm glad that in this event, we are joined by our partners, ICVA, DFAT, UNFPA, the government of Fiji, Pianjo, and the Bangla German Sampriti, a local CSO in the Cox's Bazar. We once again want to welcome all of you to this gathering, and I hope that the panel discussion moderated by my colleague Sarah Bearup on this topic will throw up interesting insights as all of us in our own way, in our own respective organizations and contexts, pursue the localization agenda. All the best, and I do hope that we will have a really fruitful and meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Localization is about empowering, strengthening, and building the institutional and technical capacity of both local and national organizations as they have a greater local presence with the community and children.
In my opinion, localization is the respect for the role of local actors and community with the goal of increasing reach, effectiveness, and accountability of humanitarian action.
Localization is very important for our context because Cox's Bazar district itself hosting the largest Rohingya refugees in the world, and the geographical locations, the complex socioeconomic conditions, and religious formations, and political ecosystem are very different from other countries and other regions.
The localization in the context of Nepal, it is very important for us to empower the local community, to respect the local diversification, and to also promote the local heritage.
Localization in humanitarian aid ensures that assistance efforts are not only effective and sustainable, but also prioritize the well-being and prospect of youth and children in the affected communities.
An absolute pleasure to moderate this panel discussion today at such a critical juncture in the sector and in the world. My name is Sarah Bearup and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for World Vision in South Asia Pacific. For inclusion purposes, I'm an Australian woman with curly blonde hair. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Today I'm wearing black rimmed glasses and a coloured scarf. We're here today to give voice to the complex realities of the localisation agenda. I've come to see localisation in terms of challenging power and empowering voices at the margins. This goes for challenging privileged local or international actors, trade policies, local norms. In the humanitarian sector, the mantra is often as local as possible, as international as necessary. This is relevant across the whole nexus. World Vision is deepening our intentionality, deepening our commitments to locally led action, and we believe wholeheartedly in being globally connected and locally led in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing landscape. We recently published some research called Inherently Local. We'd love to talk to you about that. Please do let us know if it's been of value, and that's of course what we want. While there was a consistent validation by local CBOs that we work with describing us as a trustworthy and equitable partner, there are also really important opportunities to do more, to improve, commit to locally led action. Where possible, we must confront our cultural bias to implement and invest proactively in capacity development, just to name a few. We're committed to supporting a diverse, inclusive, locally led ecosystem across the nexus in a time of rapid change and increasing need. Please, I would ask that you post your questions in the chat. We're so looking forward to a really inclusive conversation, a dynamic conversation today. And now, Without further ado, it's truly my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel members. Firstly, we have Vasiti Soko, is the first woman to hold the esteemed position of Director for the National Disaster Management Office in Fiji. As if her current position was not enough, she also co-chairs 2 technical working groups on risk governance for resilience development under the Pacific Resilience Partnership, as well as the Asia Pacific Working Group on disaster-related statistics. Ms. Soko also serves as the SIDS representative on the Steering Committee for Coalition Disaster Resilience Infrastructure. We also have Kirsten Hawke, who is the Director and Lead Advisor for Design and Locally Led Development for the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This involves oversight of a busy advisory desk supporting all new programs, including ODA and non-ODA funded. Kirsten has lived and worked across the Pacific and has more than 2 decades of experience in the development, social policy, economic and governance sectors. We also have Eri Taniguchi, who is the Gender Equality GBV Program Specialist for UNFPA in Myanmar. Eri has more than 15 years of experience in the field of gender equality and GBV. She joined UNFPA in 2011 and worked previously in Mongolia, Somalia and Iraq. In Myanmar, Eri has been working to ensure availability of and access to quality GBV services during the pandemic and, of course, the political humanitarian crisis, with an emphasis on expanded partnerships with CSOs and women-led organisation. Our development partner for this event, ICVA, is represented by Ms. Asma Salim, the Deputy Representative for Asia and the Pacific. Asma has more than 12 years of experience and particularly working on organisational development, localisation and partnerships. In her role as Deputy Regional Representative for ICVA, Asma works to strengthen meaningful participation and linkages for regional and local actors in humanitarian coordination, preparedness, climate action and partnership development. We're so fortunate to have Emmeline Siale Leolea. She is a Tongan civil society leader, women's advocate and activist based in Suva, Fiji. As Executive Director of Piango, she represents the interests of Pacific civil society in a range of regional and international fora, specifically in the areas of human rights-based approach, governance and institutional building, as well as effective and informed participation of citizens in decision-making. We were hoping to have Mr. Pang Swayumama, who represents a minority Indigenous group in Bangladesh. We wish him all the best today. He's come unwell this week and we've, of course, encouraged him to rest. We have heard his voice in the beginning video and we look forward to engaging much more with Bangla German Sambriti, BGS, which is a national volunteer development organisation. They first started in Cox's Bazar in 1991 in response to the Rohingya response, even before the influx in 2017. So we do hope that, Payne, you will take care today and we look forward to engaging in the future. Now, speakers, I remind you to be very clear and concise in your responses. Let's allow time for the Q&A. Another reminder to the audience, please do post your questions in the chat. We look forward to coming to those at the close of the formal panel discussion. Now, let us start with Director Soko. As the Director of Fiji's NDMO, you consistently witness the imperative of empowering local communities to effectively mitigate and respond to the ongoing risks posed by frequent disasters. Can you please describe the ongoing challenges and the factors that facilitate localisation efforts? We'd also like to hear from you about the obstacles that hinder localisation and what strategies can be employed to overcome them effectively. Many elements to that question, but we would love to hear from you, Vasiti. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and Bulavinaka, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to make an intervention. on this very important topic on localization. Fiji, like many other Pacific Island countries, faces significant challenges related to both climate change and disaster risk reduction, making localization in climate change and DRR very critical. If I was to generate a theme best suited for my intervention this afternoon, in Fiji's time, it's in the afternoon, it would be ownership. One of the reasons why the Disaster Management Office in Fiji, requests partners and donors to work with our NGOs and CSOs at the community level is because of ownership. We need communities to own the initiatives that has been introduced to them for sustainability. So there are three key areas through experiences that I probably would leave as part of my contribution. One is we need to work with local actors. Two is we need to recognize that there are existing infrastructure in place when moving or when deciding to work with the country. Three is making sure when our donors release the funding that there is nothing attached to it. Most of the time when we receive funding, there are some elements that are mandatory that we need to follow in order for us to access that funding. That has to stop if we want to promote localization. And I guess the last one that I really wanted to stress on is the recognition of traditional knowledge. Here in the Pacific, we are very much relatable to our land, our sea, and therefore, traditional knowledge is the first sign of connections that we have when it comes to early warning, when it comes to assistance, and when it comes to looking out for others. And therefore, these are the three key interventions we believe is critical when it comes to localization. Now, just a few things I just wanted to add for strategy that through experiences that I believe could work in a way that could promote localization. One is community engagement. And again, this is going back to the generic theme I mentioned earlier, ownership. Unless and until we get the communities involved to be part of the decision and not part of the outcome, then we will see changes happening at the community level. That will not happen if they are not part of the process. They have to be part of the process. And also, I mentioned again, the need for the recognition of existing infrastructure that exists in country. That needs to be recognized. Without that, we will be making or duplicating efforts, unnecessarily wasting resources. And at the end of the day, the communities that are supposed to be assisted or served, they don't get the benefit that they really should get. And last but not the very least is local resource mobilization. Very critical when it comes to disaster risk reduction. For space that I work in, when it comes to our first responders, when it comes to us responding when there is a disaster impacting our country, our very first responders are the community themselves. People coming in, I consider them as secondary or first responder. The first one are the very community that we serve. And these are the people that need to be upskilled. They need to be trained in order for them to be resilient for future disasters, but most importantly, the sustainability of their own community as we move forward to the unpredictable future that is before us because of climate change. I'll leave it at that, Sarah, and then I'll take more questions if there is any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vasiti. Your voice is very powerful on this. It's not the first time I've heard you speak, and I think having a perspective as the lead of an NDMO in the Pacific is so important. So thank you. We will come back to you a little bit later. Thank you. My next question today is for Asma. Asma, given ICVA's extensive collaboration with numerous partners and your active promotion of the localisation agenda, I'm very interested to hear about the promising practices that have been observed thus far, along with the key success factors associated with them. Thank you, Asma.
And thank you very much, Sarah. And I think Vesto gave a very excellent job of setting the scene. I think she's telling us from the heart, how it is important to have that localization and local actors at the center of humanitarian response. And this is something which I think it's a global realization as well, on the recognition of local governments, not only the local CSOs and NGOs, but also government and private sector as well. So I'm really glad to hear from you. So from our side, from ICVA, I'm not sure how many of you know about our network. So we are a big network of 150 organizations whose mission is to make humanitarian action more principled and effective by collectively and independently influence policy and practice. Localization, again, is one of the core area where ICVA is one of the leader. And I think when I was doing a lot of research back in like 5-6 years ago, ICVA name came again and again when I was not affiliated with my current organization. And I think localization comes in back in 90s. And I think that shows that how longer it will take to kind of, on the localization agenda, and it will happen back in 2016. So it's a huge, long journey. And again, what we have seen so far is again a process and a transformation change in the humanitarian system. So I think just keeping on the question, there are many best practices happening in the sector, and there are a couple of key practices and promising one, which we have seen in the NGOs and UN agencies who try to transform themselves by kind of, having different multiple programs and trying to bring strategies and policies as well to make sure that they have a much more better place for the localization. So I would first start with the partnership and the capacity strengthening. This is one of the practices which has been one of the most mainstream one in the localization, to kind of dissect how localization work and also how they can actually work on the strengthening of local partnerships, not only for the CSOs, but also for the government and private entities as well. Partnership, again, is something which has different models as well. There are organizations who are trying to develop partnership approaches in a consortium way, in a way that there are multiple organizations doing that, and there are a couple of big, I would say, projects and programs at the regional level, like for example, Together, Stride Project, Shift in the Power, who bring a lot of partnership experiences, and there were hundreds of local organizations who have been a part of those pilot projects, and that really enabled them to kind of bring more clarity on the processes and challenges within the partnership models. And one of the strongest one that comes are the capacity strengthening, because that is something which everybody has that realization that this should not be fragmented approach. This is not should be based on the training and workshop on the ad hoc basis, but it is more institutionalized, and it should be a part of strategy and policy framework. And we have seen recently in the WHO, UNICEF, WFP, and UNHCR. These are the key UN agencies who have actually developed policies and strategies on the capacity building trajectories for the local organizations. And of course, most of the INGOs and NGOs are also developing their localization policy and positioning as well, to make sure that they understand and their whole field offices and local partners understand what localization actually means to them. When it comes to the decision making and the participation, I think that is something which is becoming much more bigger. Now local organizations do recognize that they do not just working as an implementing partners, and they do not have just scope at the field level. They have much more voice at the policy level as well. And this is again one of the strength of ICVA as well, that as a member organization, we try to make sure that we hear voices from the ground at the policy level. And we have seen in the ISEC, Internet Agency Standing Committee, which is the highest level of coordination mechanism with UN agencies and local NGOs, and that really help us to kind of bring that local voices at the center of decision making. And we have seen that there are changes and there are a lot of a new emergence of things coming in, and from the donor agencies as well. We have seen from BHA, DFAT, and from ECHO, FCDO, that institutional donors are trying to change their policies as well and bringing more innovative ideas too. Just to wrap up, we had the success we have seen are The key factors we have seen are the communication, open communication, transparency, and more innovative and iterative approaches within the localization. And I think that's keep on going. And as we, I think, move on to the panelist, we will hear more about on the localization. So I think my time is up. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Asma. You did very well. That was quite a complex question with many little sub-pieces there. Really would love to come back to you a little bit later, because I think what you've talked about in terms of this being a long journey that we are all committing to, there are many promising practices, and we must be able to leverage and scale those up. So interesting to hear about the diverse types of partnerships, and of course, voices at the centre, always those local voices at the centre. So I really want to thank you for that. Let's hear now from local voices. Siali, I'd like to ask you the next question. Could you share with us, please, about the cultural and contextual factors that actually influence the implementation of localisation strategies, and what should be clearly understood by all stakeholders? How do we sort of navigate these complexities together? Thank you, Siali.
Thank you, Sarah. Malolele, Ulaminaka, Kolepeke Hufa Fatapu, Kayatake Fayateki Fatongia Koini. Sarah, anything that we can talk about in terms of where do we see, local understanding of localizations, and how we see that being contextualized? It kind of came around, I think, from the work that Piango has been doing, from the 2016 humanitarian summit, where there was a strong commitment from that meeting around localizations, particularly the financial commitment in terms of looking at 25% should go to local actors. And then you see the response from INGOs and the international community coming in to start defining what does localization means. And so Piango has been very fortunate to partner with the Humanitarian Advisory Group in Australian NGOs that supported the opportunity for us to bring civil society in the Pacific together to define what does localization means. And so because of that process, we were able not to be caught up with the argument about definitions. And then we just agree, okay, there are 7 key pillars of what localization means to us in our region. And I think that has been a guiding approach to the work that we have done, which speaks to, one is partnership, coordinations and complementarity, which really recognize some of our small communities in the Pacific, where our work is really, supported the work of government, policy influence and advocacy, the participation of civil society, funding, capacity, and leadership. And so that has actually guided our participation and how we bring contextual implications of what does localization mean. So it comes down to localization being a journey. And we have seen the local actors apply self-determination to the debate of what localization means, especially when we see the demand for equitable sharing of power, money, and most importantly, the power given for local actors to make decisions to find solutions for themselves. So our localization journey is now at the juncture where we recognize 2 things. The impact of climate change, there's spaces for everyone, local actors, NGOs, UN agencies, government, and we need to provide that inclusive platform for all actors to come together. The other one is the alternative system that we can connect national humanitarian response to community, so they can create alternative systems alongside government humanitarian system that can connect the local actors and their traditional knowledge and understanding of the reality of their livelihood should shape their solutions. So with Piango, we had actually worked to set up what we call the FALE, the Facility Aiding Locally Led Engagement, which actually looking at support by Star Network, a partner that we had to look at. The current humanitarian system is slow to respond to disaster. The first respondents disaster is actually the affected people themselves. And they're not given the power nor the resources to build their resilience and draw on their traditional knowledge to adapt and find solutions for their sustainable recovery. And we all know that most of the time when we have response in humanitarian, at least about 6 months before everybody else does return home. And so we are left in the community to pick up the pieces. So really what we need to do now is looking into anticipatory actions where resources are pre-positioned ahead of time to local actors so they can be able to play that role in terms of bringing their context understanding of the situations and building on that in terms of their response and supporting their government and other traditional systems to work for the people.
Thank you, Siale. There's so much we could unpack there. I know that Piango has an extraordinary reputation for really opening up the right dialogue on this, encouraged by what you've shared, these insights. We'll keep moving, just given the time. My next question is for Kirsten. Kirsten, your role is critical in advancing the localisation agenda. We're so glad that you're here with us today, and we'd love to understand how you see donors playing, what role you see donors playing in advocating for policy changes, also systemic reforms that will actually facilitate locally led action. And what are the trends you're seeing? How can we better strategise around these? Thank you, Kirsten. Over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And hope you can all hear me. I'm coming to you from Canberra, Australia, from Ngunnawal country. I think donors have an important role to play because I guess we're one of the key funders. I think our role is really an enabling role, and it's also to share good practice, right? So I think in terms of enablers, the big one is about having policy and political cover to make the changes that we want to make organisationally. And there's a lot of, I think that's starting for us here in DFAT. We've got a new development policy. We've got very supportive ministers and a supportive leadership within DFAT. So I think that's a really big enabler. I think the other one is to be long-term, really think about partnerships in that 5 to 10 year time frame. I think it really does. And also to think through where local organisations themselves want to have direct relationships with a donor versus where they want to have a direct, indirect relationship with a donor, say through a supply chain, for instance, of intermediaries or through peak local organisations. So I think thinking about partnerships and then thinking about financial flows and innovative financing is a big one. For many years, we've tried different models of budget support. Budget support is, of course, back with COVID. It's we're at record levels here in Australia because it's been so important to the pandemic and to fiscal response in the Pacific. And of course, core funding has also been in the toolbox, I guess, of donors for a long time. So ramping those things up and also there's lots of new innovative mechanisms like pass downs and pass throughs and targeted capacity development funding, and really thinking about, as others have said in the past, thinking about the whole organisation, institution, not just project by project. So taking that long-term view. Getting the incentives in place is also really important. And the other one that we've just been out for consultations to 34 governments, and the partner governments themselves said, donors, this might not actually, this actually surprised me because I was like, well, that's, you wouldn't necessarily think of this as being localisation or locally led development. But what they said to us is we need enabling programs, often through our ministries of finance, that focus on financial management and procurement so we can partner. We can do the partnering of the private sector and the CSOs and NGOs, and we can focus on our own financial flows out to subnational governments or to extend the effectiveness of service delivery, including in humanitarian situations. So I think that goes to Facility's point of resource mobilisation and local resource mobilisation. So having that bigger picture of what's the donor role, yet we're the enabler. Every context is different. So, conflict affected environments are going to have slightly different solutions because they often trigger, when we talk about challenges, it often does trigger a lot of sort of national legislation and political and legal risks for us, safeguarding risks, etc. So those have to be managed. But every context is different, and there's lots of opportunities in every context. The other thing that came back to us in all of the international feedback was that there is lots of good practice out there. We're not starting from scratch, so we've got to scoop that up, replicate it, scale it up where possible. But there's lots of good practice up there. It's just islands of excellence, for want of a better term, rather than us all doing it systematically. Yeah, so that's, I think, our job and our challenge over the next few years. But it's one we have to take on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I think we're going to have some follow-up questions, but it was wonderful to hear you speaking about Australia's commitment to localisation, going really deep there. I think even just hearing you talk about the enabling role, I think that's music to our ears, and I know DFAT is working hard on that, taking a longer-term perspective, also very important. And I think it was also another piece of music to my ears as you talked about context. You know, I know for many of us, we're quite concerned that locally led action will look very different from context to context. And as you said, the challenges, the opportunities, the strategies, the types of partnerships could be quite diverse across the region. So thank you so much, Kirsten. I'm sure we'll come back to you shortly. I know that we don't have a lot of time on our hands, but it's a really valuable conversation. I'd now like to pose a question to Eri. Eri, UNFPA has demonstrated strong commitments to localisation. Can you please share with us some of the highlights of UNFPA's work and also what we can expect next from UNFPA? Thank you, Eri.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Very happy to be here with all of you today. So UNFPA is a signatory to the Grand Bargain. And for us to fulfill our commitment to the Grand Bargain, first of all, we have set the internal target to provide 43% of humanitarian funding to local and national partners, which is actually higher than the target set out in the Grand Bargain. In 2022, about 40% of the UNFPA humanitarian assistance was provided to local and national partners. So we haven't reached the target, but we are almost there. And also 61% of our work plans with local and national partners incorporated at least one element of capacity strengthening. Also, to increase multi-year investments in the institutional capacities of local and national responders, UNFPA provided multi-year funding to 20 implementing partners and 30 subcontractees in 11 different countries during 2021 and 2023 under the Central Emergency Response Fund block grant for gender-based violence prevention and response. Also under this Central Emergency Response Fund, 143 women-led organizations were supported for capacity strengthening. Our modality of program implementation and the delivery accelerates fulfilling our commitment to the Grand Bargain because we primarily work with national government and the national local partners, women-led organizations, and the women's rights organizations to deliver essential sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender-based violence information and services. At UNFPA, we take comprehensive approach towards localization, not only focusing on funding and capacity strengthening, but also facilitating meaningful participation and representation at the humanitarian coordination mechanism and related decision-making processes. For example, in Myanmar, we have expanded our partnership with local partners, especially civil society organizations and the women's organizations in the past several years Our partnership goes beyond financial support. We regularly organize different learning and training sessions on different topics, such as sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender-based violence, prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, basic psychosocial support, self-care, staff care, and also proposal writing, results-based management, etc. We also avail different technical resources and the tools for effective and quality program delivery. In addition, UNFPA has also facilitated and encouraged our local partners to actively participate in the humanitarian coordination platforms, such as gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health and rights working groups that we lead. Through these experiences, we are observing that these local partners are gaining more confidence in taking up proactive role in the humanitarian sector and becoming ready to work with other humanitarian and development actors as well. As a next step, UNFPA will continue scaling up our efforts to meet the target of providing 43% of humanitarian funding to local and national actors. We are also developing a guidance note on localization to drive forward the operational outcomes on localization. We also aim to strengthen the way we track and report our progress on localization in order to generate evidence, learning, exchanges, and the good practices related to localization. So I will stop here. Thank you, and over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Eri. That's extraordinary hearing about all of the work being done by UNFPA. I'll be definitely keen to talk on the side and understand that better. I think what's really critical too is the way that UNFPA are looking at how to give voice to the marginalised and how to ensure that partnerships, you know, really are addressing those issues of equity, inclusion, of course, preventing and responding to GBV as well. But really want to thank you for that. Much more that we could talk about. We do have a question for two members of the panel, so I'm just going to keep moving quite quickly here. There is a question for Siale and Asma. The question is around the grand bargain, which has been around for a while, we all know. How do we assess progress of the grand bargain? And what are the critical gaps that still need to be addressed? Who wants to start first? Do we want to start with Asma? And then we'll ask Siale to come in.
Sure. Excellent question, I must say, and that was very predictable question as well. So on the grand bargain, unfortunately, one of the challenge we have seen is, you know, the accountability element, because if you look at the whole structure of grand bargain, it is self-reporting mechanism. It's not, there are not many measure of how you actually monitor organization, how they are actually reporting those number, which has been, which was a part of the contract. But what we have seen so far is that organizations do have that realization, and when we have Grand Bargain 2.0 last year, we kind of synthesize it more simple to make it more achievable for the organization, for the signatories. If we look at the numbers, it's not very promising, frankly speaking, and that one of the discussion had last year as well. But this time around, there was more emphasis on the more participation and meaningful participation again, and of course the accessible funding as well. And now there are more practical ways and practical approaches coming at the regional level and at the global level as well, like, for example, pool funding mechanism, consortium sort of models for INGOs and NGOs, where they are bringing more flexible funding. And that is one of the area which ICVA was kind of, leading that work stream, but now it's gone to another organization. But that was one of the forte for us to kind of make it more simplified version. And now we have seen a little, of course, there are practices and there is like different approaches, and most organizations are working on it. But but this is something which we keen on working on, because I think funding is one of the key area within the capacity strengthening framework to kind of, push forward. And of course, risk sharing is coming much more bigger a discussion now, and more organizations are taking a lead on that, how to make sure that there's much more mutual accountability in the grant bargain. So these are the key discussions happening. And of course, if we look at the numbers, that might give us a bit of more shock, but and I think this year would be again one of the I would say new for us to kind of access how we can make it more better. It's over, and I think maybe Siale could help us dissect more.
Thank you, Asma. Siale, over to you. Did you want to add something to that valuable response?
I don't think that I have anything else to add. Asma has actually answered that quite well. Perhaps the addition from me is that oftentimes you'll come across things like that where there's a lot of ambitions in terms of how we see global commitments to some of the issues that we face. But what it does, it's allow civil society, even at the remotest in the Pacific, that you can actually make that your advocacy call for INGOs, for donor communities to respect that, because the ambitions of that local actors are being given the opportunity for the funding to do more response effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Siale. They're both really valuable responses, and I think we all know that the grand bargain was established at a critical point for very good reasons, and no question about the importance there, and how do we all contribute. And when I think Rita comes to my mind, if you'll permit me to add one comment here, is that I hear more and more the phrase being locally led and globally connected. And I think it's been useful to hear that term, because at the end of the day, we need a diverse, inclusive ecosystem. We see increasing need, of course, there's not a diminishing need. And Siale, you made the very good point of referring to impacts of climate change as one of those drivers. And to be locally led, but with the toolbox, the full toolbox, with everyone's support and skills and offerings at the table. So very interesting. I'd love to ask perhaps that as the very last question. I'm going to direct this to Kirsten as well as Eri, if you would permit me. My question is really around, how do we authentically be locally led as well as globally connected? Kirsten, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, no, it's a hard one. I mean, so our budget is broken up into global, regional and bilateral, and we do sort of see that, right? So a lot of our bilateral programs, we're working really hard to make them as locally led as possible. Regional, of course, same thing, but we're embedding more in regional organisations, because it is about regional architecture as well. And then globally, I mean, you can see the work of the multilaterals, and I think a lot of them have been setting their own targets at either institution level or trust fund level. So I just think it is about connecting bilateral, regional and global programs and action and the global network. And that, I mean, that's the real strength of international development, right? That we can access resources when we need it. It's just we don't want those resources to be substitutive. We do want them to be additional, and we want them to be empowering resources. So I think that's the critical difference.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Kirsten. That's great. And let me check in with Eri, if you wanted to add any comments about that.
Sure. Difficult, but I think very important question. I think the process should be kind of interactive, and then I think not one-way process that maybe like international actors are bringing local actors to certain process. But then I think from international actor side, UN side, we also need to critically reflect our processes, policies, practices, to really make it accessible, and also, whether this is fit for us to have a, I think, meaningful partnership with local partners. So I think, that kind of, I think, reflective, interactive, open process is a key for having locally led and globally connected to be put in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Eri, for those wise words. That's a good way to sort of finish the panel discussion. Sadly, we are towards the end here, and I will have to hand over in a moment. But I do just want to close my portion here by reminding everyone that World Vision did just very recently publish a piece of research on locally led action. The last word being most critical for us. We now have an action plan across the region, South Asia Pacific, and it'll be really important for us to build up intentionality, to work with humility, to confront some areas that we must change, and of course to strengthen those promising practices. So really such a pleasure to have led and moderated this panel. It's also my pleasure to hand over to Kaya from ICVA, who is our partner organisation for this event. So thank you, Kaya.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and for moderating such an excellent discussion. I think we had a lot of inputs, and I just wanted to share maybe a couple of takeaways that I had, and maybe that we can continue to think about as we take this conversation forward. I think a lot of our panelists refer to this being a journey, and I think that's something we have to remember. It's been a long journey, but there have been steps and progress taken. So when we talk about the grand bargain, I think as Siale said, it was ambitious and there are ways we need to improve it. But what we've seen from this really diverse group of panelists is that they're all working towards it in different ways, and that we have to recognize that progress. And very much when we're talking about localization, keeping communities at the center is recognizing the skill set that communities bring, the assets that they're there, and putting that at the decision both of in our discussions of decision and policy making, as well as implementation, and recognizing that. And I think our partners also spoke to the really importance of creating enabling environment. And for all of us, that means a bit of maybe change in mindsets, looking at our funding environment, looking at the way we operate internally, and the way that we support locally led action. So I think, again, just a huge thank you to our partner World Vision for inviting us to this discussion, but to all our panelists who are doing this work on a daily basis, and I think to all the participants who are as well. And I look forward to keeping this discussion going with everybody. So again, a huge thank you and all the best for the rest of the APFSD this week.
Localization is about empowering, strengthening, and building the institutional and technical capacity of both local and national organizations as they have a greater local presence with the community and children.
In my opinion, localization is the respect for the role of local actors and community, with the goal of increasing reach, effectiveness, and accountability of humanitarian action.
Localization is very important for our context because Cox's Bazar district itself hosting the largest Rohingya refugees in the world, and the geographic locations, the complex socioeconomic conditions, and religious formations, and a political ecosystem are very different from other countries and other regions.
The localization in the context of Nepal, it is very important for us to empower the local community, to respect the local diversification, and to also promote the local heritage.
localization in humanitarian aid ensures that assistance efforts are not only effective and sustainable, but also prioritize the well-being and prospect of youth and children in the affected communities.